everyone, welcome back to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to part 2 of my 2025 Oscars Death Race. This is where I'm trying to watch every single Oscar-nominated film for any category, whether it be one single song that was nominated, whether it be the film in general or performance. I'll be watching them all. If you missed my last video, go check it out. I will link it up there in the top right corner where I covered all the above-the-line categories. Now we're going to go below the line and talk about all of the tech players. We've obviously talked about a lot of the films that are nominated for some tech awards, including all the Best Picture nominees that are nominated for multiple techs. But we're going to look at some of the films that only got tech nominations, and one film in general got a little bit more than some techs. It got an animated feature nomination as well. But these are all the films that qualify for the design categories, the song, the music categories. These are really fun because they're not your traditional Oscar movies. They don't have these Oscar baity narratives to them necessarily. They're nominated for a specific thing, whether it be their costumes, their makeup, their design. So these movies might not even be the best movies, but because they have an Oscar-worthy element, they qualified. They made the Oscars lineup, which is really cool. That's why I like the Death Race, because you could watch something that's prestigious and nominated for 10 awards, or something that's only nominated in one area, but is really good in that one specific area. So I'm going to kind of give my reviews on these films at large, but really dive into these specific nominations they got, starting with actually the music categories, because these are always fun because the songs especially have nothing to do sometimes with the films themselves, yet these films get nominated for things. So this is a really fun category to just kind of absorb some like really interesting kind of offbeat movies that were nowhere on anyone's radar for any categories, but ended up popping up on Oscar night. And then one of them is coming from the queen of the original song category, which is Diane Warren. This is a great place to start with the 6-888. This tells the story of the first and only all-black, all-women battalion in World War II. It is directed by Tyler Perry. But Tyler Perry, yeah, mostly known for comedies, these big, broad, kind of farcical comedies, kind of taking a route into something a little more serious, something that's kind of built around a message picture with these really big, sweeping performances, big castings. Kerry Washington's in this, Oprah Winfrey's in this, Susan Sarandon, these big legends of the craft. But it got nominated for its song. So this is a film I had no intention of watching. The message sounded good, the theme sounded good, but it was never a film I really had on my radar until I found out, of course, Diane Warren wrote the song for it, so it was probably going to get nominated. It did, so I watched it. Diane Warren's a very interesting anomaly for the Academy Awards, because she always gets nominated every single year, but her films are never on any radars in any other categories ever, really. I mean, you would have to go way, 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 way back to find films that Diane Warren wrote a song for that actually contended in other categories. I mean, her films are usually, these documentaries, or there's these really small Netflix films like the 6-888 that just kind of pop up and disappear in the span of 24 hours, but Diane Warren's songs keep them relevant in the Oscar conversation. So while the Oscars are awarding her, it also gives a spotlight for a film that I probably wouldn't have checked out otherwise. But honestly, this is one of those duds. This is one of those films that I think I felt like it was a chore, because, obviously this Death Race, it feels like homework. You need to watch this, and this. But some of them are enjoyable. I like watching them. This one, not very much. And I think the problem is also because it was nominated for a song, so you're just waiting to see if the song itself has an impact, has a payoff, and usually Diane Warren's songs come in the credits, so it's not even like it can be this active function in the movie. Now this one's a little different because it plays in kind of a montage toward the end of the movie and then segues into the credits, so at least it's got that going for it, where the actual song does boost up some of the action and some of the events of what's happening in the film. The problem I had with the film is just it was way too melodramatic. It was way too messagey, and the fact that it wasn't just letting it just happen and occur naturally. It felt like they were really going for these big sweeping moments to where every single line, every single scene, every single interaction felt like it was trying to preach and make this really powerful statement, which there are great films that do that, but do it in such a nuanced way that I don't necessarily know if Tyler Perry was the right person to do it. Tyler Perry is a very talented guy. I am actually a big fan of his acting when he does go outside of the Medea movies. I love him in Gone Girl, but I don't really think I've enjoyed much of his directorial work, and I think it's because he's just such a broad filmmaker. As I said, with his comedies, there are these big kind of slapstick melodramatic comedies, and they really work for the comedy realm, but when you're trying to take it to a war picture that has a big message to say, it comes across very Hallmarky, very Lifetimey, where everything is very melodramatic and sweepy and grand, and every single line delivery is big and expressive in a way that makes you feel like you should be sitting in the back row of a theater, but you're up close with the camera lens in front of you. So not a big fan of this film. I think the song, though, is really good. I really love her who sings the song. She won an Oscar a few years ago for Judas and the Black Messiah. She was in the cast of The Color Purple. So I'm a big fan of her. And I think, honestly, her vocals bring this song even higher up on my ranking than it would have been otherwise. I think the song is actually pretty basic, but I think her vocals are so powerful. It kind of fits in that vein of like the song Glory from Selma, the song that was nominated Stand Up, the Cynthia Erivo song from Harriet. It has that kind of anthemic, powerful beat to it that, like, I wish, the song was as good, or the film was as good as the song, because I think the song is actually the highlight of it. Whereas, like, last year when I had to watch Flamin' Hot for the Diane Warren pick on the Oscars Death Race, I liked the film, didn't love the song. Here's the other way around, where I didn't like the film, but I like the song. But I guess because it is nominated for the song, then this is a good thing that I like the song more than any other element of the film. But I would not check it out if you're not looking for this Death Race. If you're not looking to complete every single thing, then don't bother watching this. But if you are, then please have at it. But if you were just kind of looking at the nominees, I think you can just listen to the song and be okay. But if you're a completionist like I am, you watch the film anyway, and then I am sorry. But if you like the film, great. Let me know in the comments below why you did. Another film that kind of got a one-off song nomination was actually something I saw at New York Film Fest, so I've done a full review on it, so I won't go too in depth with it, but it is Elton John, Never Too Late. The song is Never Too Late. Obviously, Elton John co-wrote it with Brandi Carlile, and I'm a big fan of both of them. I like their music, their sound together when they sing together. I think this movie doesn't really offer a lot new to the Elton John story that you haven't seen in like Rocket Man in terms of his substance abuse and his coming out and his sexuality. I think all of that is hit on in Rocket Man in a much better, grander fashion. The only reason why you should check out Elton John Never Too Late is because there's a little bit of footage of the present day where he's like podcasting and stuff. That's new, but I don't think it's enough newness to be like, you have to see this documentary. It doesn't unlock any deeper level to Elton John that you didn't already know. But if you are new to Elton John, if you don't know anything about his story, then this is a great introductory documentary. But for me, as someone who knew a lot about Elton, who loved his music, this didn't really elevate anything that I had already known. But the song itself, I think it's fine. It kind of is a little bit more forgettable, especially compared to some of the other ones in its category. But I like their voices together, like I said. And I think this is a really good swan song for Elton John because he is retiring. This whole movie kind of focuses on like the end of his career in a way. Again, that's the most intriguing stuff in the documentary. So I think as like an ode to Elton, this is a really nice song to kind of say farewell. But I think he's just got such a catalog of amazing songs that this one doesn't necessarily stand out. But another music category nominee, and this is one I was hinting at earlier, that is not just nominated for score, but it also picked up 2 extra nominations, one of them being the best animated feature. It is The Wild Robot. And I wanted to talk about it here because it is a tech player. It's also nominated for best sound, so I figured this was the time to talk about it, even though I will be talking about the animated films later. But we might as well check this one off early because it did get some tech nominations, because this is more than just a great animated film. It has great technical elements. I mean, the sound design, the sound work is all really, really top notch. I mean, there was a whole Big Brother challenge this past summer devoted to the sounds of The Wild Robot, where the contestants had to listen to a sound and try to match it up with an animal. It was a really engaging challenge, and I wasn't thinking at the time, well, the sound in this is really good. I wonder if it can get a sound nomination, but it was kind of a big surprise on the day. But The Wild Robot, I never really did a review for it on this channel, but I did really like it. I saw it a little late, so that's why I didn't do a full review, because I saw it well after it had already come out. So I'd already kind of heard the hype, and I think hearing the hype honestly made it a little worse in my eyes, just because I was expecting like the best thing I've ever seen in my life. But this is also the guy who gave us Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, 2 films that are very fond and near and dear to my heart. So I think I was just kind of putting it in that echelon that I don't think this film is quite as good as those 2 films. So I was a little disappointed, but the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, no, I mean, it is still a fantastic animated film. I mean, the animation itself is dazzling. It's vibrant. It's colorful. It's absorbing. The characters are very well imagined. I mean, each character feels distinct, not just in their voice performances, but in their personalities, in their humor, in their interaction with one another, in what they overall have to add to the overall messaging of saving the environment and also motherhood and the relationship between nature and technology. I mean, this film bites off a lot and it chews it all. I think it's a really, really solid film. The only thing is, like, it hits this really massive peak in the middle of the film, this beautiful migration sequence that had me literally bawling in my seat. And I was like, yep, this is why it's a masterpiece. This is why people are overhyping it. It's not overhyped. This is a masterpiece. And then the third act, while really good, doesn't quite capture the magic of that second act. The second act, it peaks so much that like that third act was really solid. But I think of the third acts of Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, and those third acts I think just hit a little bit harder, to where this is my least favorite of those 3. But that's only comparing Chris Sanders' other works with one another. I mean, if we're looking at this on its own, especially in the context of the other animated films it's up against, I do think this is my favorite because it does just totally just take my breath away animated wise. The performances are great, and I do think the messages are really, really wonderful. And I honestly think because it peaks in the middle, yes, that's a detriment for the rest of the film because it doesn't quite reach the heights of that second act. But that second act is still one of the best second acts in any film this year. So I think I'm a little tougher on The Wild Robot because the expectations were so high. But when looking at all the animation that 2024 had to offer us, this is still the crown jewel. And this is one of DreamWorks' best films in a while, too. I feel like DreamWorks is always kind of second in command to Pixar. I feel like always people are putting DreamWorks on that next tier while Pixar and even Disney kind of take that S tier. But I do think lately, I mean, with Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and now this, and looking back at my favorite films from my childhood, like Shrek and Shrek 2, like I think DreamWorks is sneaky. I think DreamWorks is a studio to keep your eye out for. Obviously, they're not Pixar, but I think at times they are better. And this year, they are better. So, The Wild Robot nominated for 3 Oscars, but nominated for Best Original Score, Best Sound, and of course, as I said, the Best Animated Feature, which we'll talk about the other 4 in our next segment of the death race. But we got to move on here. Moving on to a film that got actually 4 technical nominations. This is one that came out late in the year that I never got to review, so I'm happy to talk about it now. It is Nosferatu. And Nosferatu, obviously inspired by the classic story. There was a silent film in the 20s. There were a few more iterations, but it is the basic Dracula template. The only thing is that it's Robert Eggers, and so he brings a lot of his very interesting, dynamic style to the thing. Now, obviously, if you know me, I'm not the biggest fan of Robert Eggers. I think he's a great filmmaker. I think he has big swings, big visions, big, bold, imaginative visions. I just haven't always vibed with his work. I really like The Lighthouse. I think The Northman's pretty good, but I really didn't love The Witch. And I try every time I go back to The Witch to love it more and more, and I just can't. Something about me and The Witch just do not mesh. And it really makes me sad because I really, really want to like it every time I see it because it's also the one that everyone else kind of puts on that top tier. So I was going into Nosferatu knowing it probably wouldn't be necessarily my cup of tea, but I could appreciate it. And that's exactly what it was. It was not my cup of tea, but I absolutely appreciated it. And the things I appreciated about it are the things it's being recognized for. I thought it was so beautifully shot, so well designed, the costumes, the sets, and I honestly think the performances are probably the best of any of Eggers' films. I think the performances here are so stellar. Lily Rose Depp is giving one of the most in-depth performances, sorry to make that wordplay, that I've ever seen. It is just so nuanced and grounded, but also takes those big horror swings we want to see from these actors in these horror movies to where, he really just creates a great blend of authenticity for the time period while also taking these big horror swings to make you literally shiver and in fear in your seat. The only thing is that I think the pacing was a little too slow to fully engage me. That's also a problem I had with The Witch. And I just think because, we've seen the Dracula story told many times, the actual narrative didn't offer a ton else to chew on. But I think just the way it's stylistically presented, it is a brand new telling of the story like you've never seen it before. So I think if you are a fan of the Dracula story and you know what the beats are coming, the beats that are coming, you know what they are, you can kind of predict its next step. I don't think you can predict what it's going to do visually or with its horror or with its makeup or with its design and its shots. And I think that's what's special about Nosferatu. I really, really want to love this one. So I'm going to give this another watch, hoping it kind of goes up the list, at least the Eggers list, because right now I would still put The Lighthouse at the top and The Witch at the bottom. I think this is better than The Witch, which for many people will be a hot take, but I don't think it quite reaches the heights of The Lighthouse. So I'm really going to have to rewatch this one because there are so many elements I really, really appreciate. It just, I don't know, I saw this after a long stretch of shows. I was doing a show and I had 4 shows in a weekend and I was so exhausted. I saw it. I almost fell asleep, which is such a disservice because I really wish I could have given it the best headspace I could have because I do think there's a lot of potential there for me to love it on rewatch. So that's kind of my disclaimer for Nosferatu, but it is a spectacularly made film and that's why it gets 4 nominations on the day. It obviously gets Best Production Design, Best Cinematography, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and Best Costume Design. Now, everything else on this list only got 1 nomination apiece, so we're just going to kind of go in order. The first category I have is makeup, so we're going to be talking about A Different Man next, which is a film I really loved. This was a film I saw in the midst of New York Film Fest. I had seen a bunch of films one day, and I had a screening at like 6 o'clock and a screening at like 10 o'clock, and I was like, what do I do at like 8 o'clock? I need something to do. So I was like, I'll go see this movie, A Different Man. It's playing. It's not a New York Film Fest film, but I'll see it. There's a movie theater right across the street, and I was blown away. I mean, this feels like All About Eve, but like with a sinister twist with the characterization exploration of like the Elephant Man, and kind of the abstract nature of something Lynchian in a way. So I really dug this film. I think it has a lot to say about image in a similar way that The Substance does, but in a more cynical way. I think The Substance, it's more tragic at times. It just kind of unravels into something, very thought provoking. But here it's just kind of pathetic. It's a really cynical story of this pathetic character. But you also feel this empathy for this character. You also feel a little bit of sadness for him as well. And I think that comes with Sebastian Stan's great performance. It is a very layered character where you feel bad for him, but you also realize he's being a pretty bad person at times. But you also feel that little bit of like, that sadness and that disappointment for him, but also the sadness and disappointment in his actions. It's a really well thought out character piece and character study from Sebastian Stan. A second great character study from Sebastian Stan this year between The Apprentice and this one. But I think this one also has great supporting performances. I think Renate Reinsve, who we saw in The Worst Person in the World a few years ago, she is really making a mark as one of the most exciting actresses. She just has an electricity and a spark every time she's on screen. Adam Pearson is terrific. I've only seen him in one other film, Under the Skin, so it was really great to see him kind of get an even bigger, almost leading role at times. He doesn't show up until late in the film, but when he does, he becomes like the main character. I just love this kind of interaction between these three characters and how they play in the space with one another, and just the different themes that come about with a beauty image and the things that we think we should look like and the ways we think we should present ourselves like to book a role that we might not have gotten before, or to get the girl we always thought we wanted to get but didn't think we were good enough to get. But then in actuality, the false reality of that and the false ideology of that, and kind of when the door comes swinging back in your face. I thought it was really fascinating, and there's a lot of great dark comedy in there. And of course, we do have to talk about the makeup, because the makeup is such a central, centerpiece of this film. And yes, there is only like one or two different makeup looks in this film, so a lot of people are like, that's it, but it is such a central part. It is such an iconic look. It is such an important part of the piece of the puzzle, in a similar way that like The Whale was. I hate that film, but the makeup in that film was such a central part of that performance, of that movie, of the messaging, and I think in this case it is as well. And I think people don't realize there's a lot of great old age makeup happening at the end of the film as well, because we do see Sebastian Stan and Renate Reinsve and Adam Pearson's characters later in life, and they are significantly older and aged up by the makeup. So it's not just the prosthetic of the deformity in Sebastian Stan's face. There are a lot of other things happening with the makeup that are maybe a little bit more subtle, but that's why I think it's such a cool nomination. I just love movies like this that get nominated for makeup and for different techs, because they're such small players that they never feel like they're big enough to hang with the big dogs. It's sad, but it just didn't feel like A24 put enough backing behind this film. But I do love that one element of it was so strong that it still had to crack the list anyway. And I think in a just year, this would get far more than just makeup. It would get performance nominations. It would get a screenplay nomination, especially. The screenplay is fantastic, but I'm just happy it got in regardless. But A Different Man nominated for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. Another one that got one nomination that I was honestly surprised. If you had told me that this was the one nomination it would have gotten, I would have called you crazy about a year ago. And that is Maria, directed by Pablo Larraín, starring Angelina Jolie, and of course shot by Edward Lockman, who is a legend, and I understand why he got the nomination. All of Pablo Larraín's films, especially the ones in this kind of vein of like these tortured, tragic women figures in American history, it is really interesting to see how he shoots it. It has this softer, kind of grainier texture to the cinematography to really make it feel like it is kind of part of the period it takes place in, which I really love. I love the way all of his films are shot. They're very warm and cozy in a way. It's a feeling I can't really describe verbally, but if you know his films, you know what I'm talking about. Like this kind of comforting, cozy vibe, almost like you're sitting by a fireplace. It's just kind of, ruminates and really engulfs you in this really spectacular, visual style. But if you had told me that this was the one nomination Maria would have gotten, I would have called you crazy, because Angelina Jolie for so long seemed like such a contender and such an undeniable frontrunner. I mean, this is a performance in another Pablo Larraín film, following two great Pablo Larraín films where the actresses were awarded. Natalie Portman got a nomination for Jackie, and Kristen Stewart got a nomination for Spencer. El Conde got that cinematography nod, so I knew it was going to get in somewhere in the Oscars. But if you had told me it got a sole cinematography nomination, I would have called you crazy, because, it just feels like such an actress nomination nomination vehicle, because Angelina Jolie's doing a great job. I also think the sound work in this film is really great, and how they blended Angelina Jolie's vocals with Maria Callas's vocals, because she is an opera singer. And this story kind of tells the later years of Maria Callas's life as she was coming to terms with her loss of her voice and her vocal cords, and kind of leading up to her death. I thought it was a really interesting character study. I think it's the least impactful of the three, probably just because the first two stories were so harrowing, whereas this one's more just tragic. But I do think, this is a solid trilogy capper. I mean, I love how Pablo Larraín kind of made all of them feel like they were in the same vein as one another, even though they are their own separate stories. I love how this feels like it is cut from the same cloth as Spencer, as Jackie, but unfortunately it didn't get the nominations that those films got. It didn't get an actress nomination. It didn't get some text like costumes or production design. It only got cinematography, but the cinematography is gorgeous. But I did expect this to be a bigger player on the day. Another one that I expected to be a bigger player on the day was Gladiator 2. At first, when they announced this sequel, I was like, oh, I don't know about that. A Gladiator sequel years and years and years after the first one. But then the more I heard about it, it actually made sense. It was kind of like this legacy sequel about this kid kind of avenging his, father figure, Maximus. And I honestly started getting those like Top Gun Maverick vibes from it, and the fact that it was like a really great filmmaker, obviously Ridley Scott, coming back to the movie that he literally won Best Picture for years and years and years ago. It honestly kind of reminded me of Avatar in that way as well. But kind of taking these legacy characters and really having something to say about legacy and parenthood, and how we don't always grow up to be and amount to be the things we are promised as kids, and sometimes we have to fight for our glory again, in a similar way of like Goose's story and Rooster's story in Top Gun Maverick. That's why I was getting those Top Gun Maverick vibes, because I was like, this honestly feels a little bit akin to that. But the added bonus that I thought this film had was that there was no Russell Crowe. So it didn't have to be necessarily married to the last film. The only character that carries over really is Connie Nielsen's character. I thought this could exist as its own thing, where Maximus is merely kind of an idea, a thought, a legacy. And you didn't need Maximus to be a physical character in the film. And I thought all those things were really big strengths for Gladiator 2. And that's why I thought it was going to be a real crowd pleaser. And then I saw it, and I loved it even more than I thought I would. I mean, you didn't think I was going to say that, did you? But I really loved Gladiator 2. I thought the action was solid. Every single character felt really well fleshed out. They each had their own personalities. None of them felt samey from one another. It was like, oh, there's the crazy brother. There's the kind of misguided but even crazier brother. There's Denzel doing his Denzel thing. Paul Mescal's performance, a little bit more understated, but that perfectly works because he is the sad boy king. I mean, he plays sad boys in every single film he's in, and it works for this character. Then you have Connie Nielsen reprising a role. Pedro Pascal is just kind of the everyman good guy, the very moral compass of the group, but he also has a little bit of conflict with this character. So I really just thought every single person had a really important role to play. I thought the ensemble played really well with one another. I thought it was really well stylized. Some of the visual effects are a little wonky, some of the monkeys and stuff like that, but I think, I'm okay with the fact that they weren't brutally murdering realistic looking monkeys. I'm glad the monkeys kind of looked a little bit more fantastical, so we didn't have to get those images of animals getting brutally killed. I've heard a lot of people complain about, why don't the monkeys look real? You really want to see real monkeys get killed? Like, I don't know. That's a little problematic. But I really thought Gladiator 2 was really well stylized. It felt grand. It felt epic, And honestly, I don't know if I would put this above the first one, but I think it's right on par with it. As someone who likes the first one a lot, but isn't like, oh my God, that's a masterpiece, I thought this was also really solid. I'm not saying it's a masterpiece, but I had a really great time. I think it's also because a lot of people set my expectations low for Gladiator 2, but Gladiator 2 ended up flopping. It didn't make a lot of money at the box office. It was going up against Wicked. A lot of people didn't love it. A lot of people were praising Denzel's performance and only Denzel's performance, even though I'd argue that I think Paul Mescal, Connie Nielsen, even Pedro Pascal, and maybe Fred Etchinger all give better performances than Denzel. And that's not a slight at Denzel. I think he's great, but it just goes to show how great this ensemble is. I think this is flooded with great performances, great design. Obviously, the costumes get nominated, rightfully so. I was just surprised. I was surprised that this didn't take off and become a bigger technical juggernaut, especially because last year Ridley Scott gave us Napoleon, and I didn't love that film, but it still got 3 nominations. So for the fact that Gladiator 2, which I thought was such a step up from Napoleon, only got 1, was a bit surprising. But it did get costume design, and I think that is a very reasonable nomination for that. I did just talk about monkeys, and I actually think that's a great segue to our next film, which is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I did a full review on this, so you can go check that out. I still maintain the same thoughts I had back then. I love this one a lot. I love this franchise. I was worried that this film was going to be like a very weird kind of forced sequel. Caesar, spoiler alert, died in the last movie, so I was like, I don't know where else you can go with this. But what I love about this film, even more than like what I was talking about with Gladiator 2, where it's set in the future and Maximus doesn't exist, this film goes hundreds of years in the future, where Caesar not only doesn't exist, but he's kind of just a myth and a legend. Like no one in this timeline knew Caesar, so it almost kind of acts as like this Jesus figure in the form of religion, and the fact that like religion, as it gets passed on by generation to generation, can be adopted by certain groups, but also could be also misconstrued. And I thought this was a really good critique on how religion can be dangerous when it is passed down through time, and sometimes how the actual goals and the ideologies and the lessons of religion sometimes get a little bit tainted as they kind of get passed on through time. And I thought this was showing how some people kind of misconstrue religion and make it into a more negative thing and use it as a way to ostracize others. And I thought that that's what this film was exploring so well. I thought this was such a genius way to continue this story and continue this franchise without needing to marry it to the first three. And obviously, yes, Caesar is an influence in this film, but it felt like its own separate thing, its own story. It was about these bird colonists who were like, had this colony of birds and was trying to like take care of these birds, this bird sanctuary. Not what I expected this fourth Planet of the Apes movie to do, but I love that it wasn't what I expected. And I love that it still had these really great themes about humanity and nature and ape and man, ape strong and all this stuff. But it was totally adjacent to what we had seen before, using it as a spiritual template rather than trying to concurrently, build on the events directly from the third one. They really just took a leap and said, you know what, we're going to infuse it into the nature, into the lifestyles of these characters, but we're not going to necessarily adopt the storylines and continue those things. We're going to let it kind of breathe as a subtext. And I really, really like that. And as for the visual effects, I think these films are some of the best visually stylized films that we have right now. It's one of my favorite blockbuster franchises right now is the Planet of the Apes movies, because every single film they up it. Every single performance is that much more realistic, that much more engaging, that much richer. And I think it makes sense. This whole series is about evolution. And I think the visual effects as well are evolving with these films. And I think this is honestly the best one yet in terms of its visuals. I think it's just visually spectacular. Is this my favorite of the new four kind of Apes movies? Probably not, but I think visually it definitely is a step up from everything we've seen before, to where I hope that this could be the one that finally gets its win. It won't, it'll be Dune, but one can hope. Another hope I can have is that Better Man just gets nominated for everything. It didn't. It only got one, but it got in here, so we get to talk about it on an Oscars video, which is so exciting. Better Man, also nominated for Best Visual Effects. This movie, I heard about it. I said I could give 2 S's. I don't care. I don't want to see it. And then I heard a little bit of buzz, a little bit of hype. And then I saw a clip online of Rock DJ, and it was all one take. It was only a minute, and I was like, wow, I want to see this. And then I went and I was like, wait a sec. The guy who did The Greatest Showman, a musical that is like fun, it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure, but like I don't think it's a very well-directed movie, directs the crap out of this film. I mean, this is a film about Robbie Williams. I don't know a lot about Robbie Williams. I've heard a lot of his songs. If you're an American Idol fan and you knew Hee Jun Han and David Archuleta, we've heard the song Angels sung on American Idol a few times, but I was not a big Robbie Williams fan. I knew a few of his songs, but to watch this film, this isn't just a film to like learn about Robbie Williams and learn a little bit more about his music. No, this is a film that takes an artist and tries to embody this artist's sensibility and point of view and way of thinking in a totally imaginative way. And this is kind of what I think about when I think about like the best musical biopics, like Rocket Man, for example. We already talked about it with Elton John, but this movie, Rocket Man, felt like the spiritual embodiment of Elton John. The actual musical numbers felt like the personality of Elton John, the ethos, the pathos, the way of thinking of Elton John, in a similar way that this movie felt like the kind of mind of Robbie Williams, just seen bled out in front of us. And I just love this. I just thought this was so imaginative, so technically marvelous. I think, the ape at the center of it is a great CGI creation, but they also create these very stunning visual, musical numbers, and this big fight sequence that happens in this arena with all these different CGI creations. There's a scene where he's like speeding in his car, and there's like, this really cool kind of experimental, existential montage thing going on. I just thought this film had so much fun with its visual language. It's a biopic you've never seen before. And I think that Rock DJ sequence, I love the minute-long clip I saw before I saw the film, but seeing the film and realizing, wait, this is 3 or 4 minutes long, and it's all still one take. like, I mean, I think this is the biggest glow up from a first to second film, um, in terms of Greatest Showman to Better Man, that I've ever seen. And Michael Gracie literally just became one of my favorite musical filmmakers right now. And in a movie musical year, with Amelia Perez getting the most nominations at the Oscars and Wicked Part 1 being one of the most box office financially successful films of the year, the fact that my favorite musical of all the movies I saw last year was this Robbie Williams monkey biopic. Yeah, it's true, and I can't believe it, but it is true. I think it is fantastic. I think it most understands the actual musical medium and the fact that, these musicals exist to sing, to dance, to live, to breathe, to have fun, and you don't always need to cut the camera every single second. You can just let the musical numbers speak for themselves, and the dancing and the performers and the performances, and you can actually play around and make it feel fantastical and whimsical and fun. I think Better Man did it better than any musical this last year, and that's not to slight the other films, even though I don't love those other films, but I do think this film better understood the language of musical filmmaking better than any film I've seen in this century since Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. I can think of on my hand, I can count how many other musicals I think do it better or just as well. I mean, I think Enchanted did a really good job. I'm a big fan of Chicago, the one that won Best Picture, but really, like, this is top 5 musicals of the century, and I'm not kidding. I think this is a fantastic film. Are there issues? Is the writing great? Not the best, but I don't think it's here to be this masterpiece in writing. It's a visual masterpiece. It really just embodies the style and the aura of Robbie Williams in such a fascinating way. And I've seen a lot of people being like, I don't want to see it. Robbie Williams is a big deal in Britain. He doesn't matter here. And I'm like, if everyone had those thoughts for every single artist, I mean, like, there are many biopics I can think of artists from other parts of the world that people loved. I mean, Gandhi won Best Picture. He's not American. So, like, I don't understand this whole sentiment of, he's big in the UK. He's not big here. I don't need to see it. Because I think the best biopics are the ones about people you don't know. Because honestly, I learned a lot more in this biopic than I did with the Bob Dylan one, because I know about Bob Dylan. I know his story. I don't necessarily need to hear it again. Same with like Freddie Mercury with Bohemian Rhapsody. The biopics I'm most interested in are the ones that feel like the artists they are emulating. They feel like they belong in the same breath and vein of those artists, but also the ones that tell me stories about people I don't know. I want to learn about people. I want to go to the movies to get entertained and educated. And part of that is learning stuff that I've never known before. And I feel like that would be all the incentive for people to go see this movie. Sorry, I'm ranting so much. It's just, I don't know why people gave this one such a horrible deal. They were just like, I'm not going to see it. It's Robbie Williams. I don't know who that is. Like, okay, great. I don't know who that is. I want to go find out. Like, that should be the mentality there, especially because it is the best musical since West Side Story. It is phenomenal. It is colorful. It is dazzling. The cinematography, the editing, it's all perfect. I'm thinking about it by Pickle Award nominations, and I realize I way under-nominated this film because I'm thinking about more. I should have nominated this for editing. I should have nominated it for directing. Like, I really made a mistake because I gave it some nominations, but I didn't give it enough because it is a fantastic film. And in a year where there wasn't another film with a bunch of apes in the conversation, I probably would have given this the win. But this one ape is fantastic, and the other film has a bunch of fantastic apes. But this is still a great film. I'm so glad that this Oscars death race hopefully gives people a chance to check it out. But we have to get to our last film, and this one's a little bit of a downer to end on because I was not a big fan of it, but it did get nominated, and that is Alien Romulus. This is a film I also did a big review for, so I don't want to get into it. I think it was okay, it wasn't a great film because I think it was just too infused with fan service, which I get it. You're a fan, you're serviced, great, fine. But I just think as someone who watched all the Alien movies right before seeing it, it was just a little too much with the references and with the cheesy kind of one-liners harkening back to older films. It just felt a little unnecessary. Like, I would have rather just spoke for itself and been its own thing in a similar way that Prometheus and Covenant were. Yes, there were tiebacks, but it wasn't like it was consistently trying to find a way to call back to those other films. It was just kind of existing naturally. And I think because I'm such a fan of Alien Covenant, it is my favorite Alien film. You're probably going to log off the video now. I'm so sorry for that, but it is my favorite Alien film. Favorite. I didn't say best, but favorite. But I do think because it's my favorite, I just really felt like that could have been a really cool story to continue exploring with David's character. And then they decided to do this other film. I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. You're going to kind of steer from the path a little bit. It's not going to be Ridley Scott, but it's going to be, a capable director with capable performers. I love Kaylee Spaney. I love David Johnson. But I was disappointed in how much it was just trying to feel like one of those like Disney-fied prequels that needs to tie itself every single little beat to the main franchise. But I've ranted about it long enough. The main point of this movie is the visual effects. That is why it got nominated, so I want to stay on that. I think the visual effects, 90% of them are great. I think, honestly, the Alien recreation is fantastic. The space stuff, the use of the production design mixed with the visual effects and the settings, the explosions, they're all great. The problem, though, is that the one worst part of the film is that CGI recreation of Ian Holm, and I think that is a big glaring mark on its visual effects. To where if you are awarding the visual effects, that comes with it. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, the visual effects are great," except for that 10% that is Ian Holm. And the problem is, it's not even 10%. I mean, he's in a big chunk of the movie. I would say he's more like 25-30% of the movie is stuff involved around him. So I was not a big fan of this one, especially the visual effects nomination, just because I think for all the great visual effects there are, there's still that very glaring, very poor visual effect at its center, which is that AI recreation. And depending on the morals and the estate and getting permission and such, that's a whole separate conversation. But I think it just looks bad. I just don't think it looks very good. I think it's distracting. It never once, brought me into the film, and if anything, it pushed me away. It broke my immersion. So I was not a big fan of this film, and I get why other people are. I get why some fan service stuff speaks to so many people, but I'm just not the biggest fan of fan service. If you enjoy this, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you had fun, but I did not personally have fun with it. But Alien Romulus nominated for visual effects. Now it's time to go through and kind of rank all of the nominees in all these categories. Some of them are movies we covered in the last video, so I'm not going to go in depth on them, obviously. But we're going to start with the best original song. Honestly, with this short list, I was a little disappointed with all the songs across the board, but this particular song, Like a Bird, Sing Sing, was my number one on that short list. It's my number one here. It's the only one that I think is truly Oscar worthy, but I really do like The Journey. I think this is one of Diane Warren's better songs, so that's going to be a number 2. And then at number 3 and 4, I have Amelia Perez. See, I didn't rank it right at the bottom like I have in most categories, even though after this, you're going to see I'm going to rank it on the bottom for quite a bunch of them. But I do think the songs are fine. I think Zoe Saldana does a great job with El Mal. The only problem is I don't like the bits that Amelia herself sings. And then Mi Camino is sweet. It's good. It's fine. I think Selena Gomez does great. But number 5 is Elton John, Never Too Late. It's just the most forgettable song for me. Moving on to original score, I actually think the Wild Robot score is the strongest suit in that movie. I think that is a fantastic score that I've been listening to nonstop. The Brutalist score is right on up there. It would battle for my number 1. Every other day, I'd probably switch my 1 and 2. I think it's a fantastic score. And then we kind of trail off a little bit. Conclave, pretty solid score, would be my number 3. Wicked is going to be my number 4. I've kind of talked about my problems with that score and the fact that, like, how are you going to include this but not include Dune? Whatever. I still think it's a great score. Amelia Perez, though, I would put in dead last here. I honestly can't really pick out the score. I couldn't hum it to you because most of the score that I think of is actual songs. So I got to actually kind of listen to the score alienated from the songs and see if it speaks to me in a way. But even then, I don't think it would crack that top 4. Best sound, I still think Dune still has the best sound of the year. I think Wicked and Complete Unknown kind of fit at that 2 and 3 slot because they have really great musical moments and the way they're able to kind of craft the voices to the sound and the way they're able to mix the voices, especially Wicked doing so on set. Having the actors singing on set was a very big plus. And then The Wild Robot, what a cool nomination for best sound. And then, sadly, Amelia Perez at the bottom. At production design, this is where Wicked takes it for me. Wicked had the absolute best production design of the year. I think the cinematography kind of desaturates some of the color from them, but just if you were to take a picture of the sets, if you were there in person, I mean, I've seen all the behind the scenes, documentaries and making ofs, and those sets are just absolutely brilliant. The Brutalist, another strong runner up. I really think in any other year, The Brutalist would be number 1. I mean, I love the Brutalist architecture in that film. The only problem is it's going up against Wicked that just has, I think, slightly better sets and just more sets. It's kind of quality and quantity. And then Dune, solid number 3. I think the sets are always great in Denis Villeneuve's movies, especially his big sweeping fantasy ones and sci-fi ones. Number 4, we're going to put Conclave. I didn't realize they remade the Vatican for this film. It's very impressive to see them do that. The only problem is, like, it is a real life thing they were able to model after, so it's not like a lot of the design itself was quite original, but the actual construction of that production design, the actual way they came about making it was very impressive. And then at number 5, Nosferatu. It just so happens that the other 4 are stronger. That's kind of just where it comes down to at the end of the day. Cinematography, Brutalist is going to take it for me, this one. If Challengers were here, it would probably challenge the Brutalist, but it's not. Dune Part 2, though, I thought this was a huge step up in the cinematography. I didn't love the cinematography of the first one. I thought it was a little murky. This one is a huge step up. I think Greg Fraser does such a good job. But then Nosferatu, I think also this one, it gets a little murky at times, but I think it could have been the theater I saw it in. But I do think the actual compositions and the framing and the lighting, it is pretty solid. And then Maria is going to be in my number 4. I really do like the looks of the Pablo Larraín women trilogy that he's been making. Amelia Perez is going to be here at the bottom, even though I do think the cinematography for Amelia Perez isn't that bad. I've actually looked at some clips of it. I actually think there's some interesting shots in it. I don't think this is the worst of the nominations it got. Moving on to makeup and hairstyling, this one, The Substance, takes it for me 11 days out of 10. I think this was a perfect showcase for great practical body horror makeup. Nosferatu, though, any other year would have been my number 1 because the makeup on Count Orlok is absolutely phenomenal. Even that big hokey mustache, I kind of loved it. It gave it some personality. Different different man. Again, only one real solid makeup style in that film, but it is such an integral one. It is such a centerpiece of that film. And they do have some old age makeup at the end that I think is a little underrated. At number four, Wicked. This is the, obviously Elphaba look, which it's not just painting her green. They also had to give her prosthetic ears to cover up Cynthia Erivo's tattoos. So that's impressive. Honestly, I think Wicked is an even more impressive showcase of hairstyling than it is makeup. I think the hairstyling, especially Glinda with that long, wavy blonde hair, is actually really fantastic. So I think Wicked honestly earns it more for its hairstyling than it does its makeup. And then Emilia Perez at the bottom. I will say the transformation of Carla Sofia Gascon in the scenes where she has to play Emilia Perez before her transition is actually some of the stronger makeup work of the year, but it is only literally that one scene. Everything else I couldn't really tell you about the specialty of the makeup in that film. Best costume design, Wicked also takes this one. I think the costumes are spectacular. Nosferatu, a great period piece. Gladiator 2, great period looks, great armor in the Gladiator ring. I actually put a Complete Unknown at 4. I think honestly transitioning and going through all these iconic Bob Dylan looks and having to kind of create these costumes for these memorable folk figures at the time. I thought they did a really good job showcasing kind of this changing of time from folk to electric, quite literally with the costumes as well. You could see the folky outfits, and then when they transferred to electric, everything was a little bit more based in leather. There were a little bit of darker hues and blacks in the costume design. So I think the costume design in A Complete Unknown is very underrated. And then Conclave at number 5. I think it's solid. I think it's great. The only problem is like all the popes are wearing the same thing. So it's really just 2 or 3 costumes. There's not as much variety in the costumes, but the costumes themselves are still good. Moving on to film editing, I actually would put Nora here at the top. I think that second act in particular, the comedy of it all, the way they edit that, that whole central home invasion scene is really impressive. And then The Brutalist at number 2, a very strong number 2. I think all the montages, especially the beginning of the film, the kind of lead up to the intermission as well, just some of the best editing of the year. And I think even though it's 4 hours, I still think it moves by really well. Conclave is number 3. It's a very sturdy, very solid editing nomination there. Wicked Part 1, I actually think one of my detriments of Wicked is that it does feel way too long, and that is part of the editing. Yes, a movie can be 4 hours, but paced really well. And Wicked, which is not 4 hours, is not paced as well as The Brutalist and feels longer than The Brutalist. So that just goes to show how important editing is. Amelia Perez, same thing. I just don't think the editing is that great. I think it's a little manic, a little all over the place. The split screen stuff, not necessarily my favorite type of editing, but honestly, could have included a lot more films in that category. Like Challengers, I think should have been a no-brainer in editing, but who am I? I'm just one guy. Moving on to visual effects, though, this is where I said any other year, Better Man would be my number 1 because I just think that visual, representation of Robbie Williams through both its style and its main character is so amazing. But Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes just had more apes, and they were all expressive. They were all fantastic. Kevin Durant's character, was just utterly captivating to watch on screen. So I would put those neck and neck 1 and 2, but Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes would be my number 1. I really want to see it win. Dune is number 3, and that's probably a shocker, but really, I mean, Dune is fantastic. It's just those other 2 films were a little bit more impressive for me, and I do think a lot of the stuff we saw in Dune 2, we also kind of saw in Dune 1, but still, very impressive visual effects. I mean, it is a visual effects spectacular film. That is not taking away anything from Dune 2. It's just, I thought 3 of these films were very strong. Wicked Part 1, I'm going to put it number 4. The Flying Monkeys are pretty solid, but some of the green screen is really, really bad. But number 5, Alien Romulus, I'm just not a fan of the visual effects in this thing. I think they're solid, except that one part, but that one part is so obtrusive of everything else. It kind of just obstructs everything that I'm like, you know what? No, not my favorite. So that is my summary of all the tech films and the films nominated for tech categories. Stay tuned next time. We've got a few more things to cross off the list, but we are going to cross these 10 off right now. Boom, we did it. We crossed them all off the list. But next week, we are going to be talking about some of the international films, some of the rest of the animated films, the documentaries, and of course, all our 15 shorts. We're almost there. We're probably a little bit more than halfway through done with the Death Race. So stay tuned for more. Comment down below what you thought of these films and what your rankings in some of these categories would be. Otherwise, stay with me and stay tuned. And thank you for checking out this video. Bye.